Hi everybody, welcome to Great Books, Big Ideas. I'm Jim. I'm back with another update. The other day, I guess it was actually a week or so ago, on June 6th, I finished The Fugitive by Marcel Proust. This is the penultimate volume in Search of Lost Time. These are the Penguin Classics Deluxe editions overseen by Christopher Prendergast. And this particular volume was translated by Peter Collier, and he did a fine job with it. So what I want to do with you today is give you a synopsis of this volume, tell you where we are at in the plot, and also I'll give you some assessment of my thoughts about the book, briefly, just brief impressions, and also we'll compare translations. So this is one of the newer translations by Peter Collier compared with the C.K. Scott Moncrieff Stephen Hudson translation of The Sweet Cheat Gone. That's how they translate that title. But first of all, let's talk about where we are at in a storyline. And I will say this about The Fugitive. It is probably the slimmest volume in the whole set of books. It was a quick read for me. This story, I realized, is really kind of like a soap opera. And you get so many developments in here. There will be spoilers in this synopsis, so be forewarned. I hope most of you who are watching this, maybe you've read Proust already and you're just revisiting it and you want to hear someone talk about this translation, but or maybe you don't care if there's spoilers, but you know, there's very little plot in Marcel Proust, but there is some plot, and we definitely have some major plot points here. So anyway, we left in the previous volume, The Prisoner, on the note of a cliffhanger. Albertine has left our narrator. Albertine is the girlfriend of the narrator. She's been a kept woman in his house apartment, and now she has finally taken leave, and we are picking up the action at that point. And our narrator then reads a farewell letter from Albertine, and he looks for ways to get her to return. So he immediately begins scheming, and he wants to buy her off with, giving money to her family or her, getting her a yacht, getting her a Rolls Royce, allowing her to have more independence, even proposing marriage. So these are all like ideas he's coming up with to scheme to get her back. First of all, he's got to figure out where she went to, and he vacillates a lot between anguish and anxiety and resignation. I'm done with her, I'm not done with her, I'm in love with her, I'm not in love with her, she's going to come back today or tomorrow, no, she's never going to come back again, and back and forth it goes. Then he enlists the help of his friend, Robert Saint-Loup, to help. He's going to conduct some reconnaissance, he's going to track her down and scheme to get her back. And in the meantime, there's I would call it like sort of a perverse and farcical set of episodes that just made me laugh out loud at the absurdity of it and the foolishness of it. So during all this like kind of scheming and fretting about Albertine being gone, he's feeling pretty bad about himself. So he sees this innocent little girl, like out on the street, like a poor girl, and he brings her into his home to assuage his grief over Albertine. So he sort of holds her, he fondles her, and it gets, I guess it's a little creepy, right? But anyway, he then sends her away, I guess because he's kind of like just thinking about Albertine the whole time. And not long after this, I forget how many days or whatever, he is summoned by the chief inspector because the little girl's parents got suspicious, and now he's in trouble with the law. And he's like, I can't believe they would suspect me of like, dude, you just brought this little girl into your apartment. What do you think they're going to say? But anyway, now he's in trouble. Now he's going to be like watched over by the chief inspector. And there's a lot of irony here too, because he's been nothing but spying on Albertine throughout their whole relationship. And Francois tells him that now the house is under surveillance and he's not allowed to touch little girls anymore. I guess that's a good thing, by the way. But anyway, like, it's just ridiculous. It was like, there's some really funny stuff in this book, like where the guy just has no self-awareness and, he's like sort of a fool. But what's great about these later volumes in Search of Lost Time is like he's becoming more and more aware about how much he got wrong, how foolish he's been, but it's kind of like takes a while to get him to like grow this awareness. At this point, we get pages and pages of reflections about Albertine, and while he's sleeping, while he's awake, and we have lots of interesting reflections about relationships and how our relationships with people exist only in the mind and in our memory, and how our memories dissolve a person as those memories grow dimmer, weaker. Lots of like great ruminations on all that. And then the narrator receives a telegram from St. Loup, who says he did see Albertine, but Albertine saw him spying on her, and this infuriates our narrator. It's like, St. Loup, you really screwed up. Like, how could you do that? He calls St. Loup back to Paris, and then at this point he receives a telegram from Albertine telling him that if he had only written to ask her to come back, she would have come back. Let me read this telegram in its entirety. It's short. And this is from the Collier translation. My dear friend, you have sent your friend St. Loup to see my aunt, which was ridiculous. If you needed me, my dear, why did you not write directly to me? I would have been only too pleased to return. Do not try any such absurd approach again. And here we have, Albertine just kind of cutting to the chase and saying, like, why don't you just be straightforward with me and tell me how you really feel? And I would have come back, right? But this guy just hems and haws to a ridiculous degree, and he does nothing but kind of like undermine this relationship. Anyway, it's, wow. So then he writes a letter back to her, and he's continuing to play mind games. There's like so much pretzel logic. It's incredibly twisted. And he tries to manipulate the kind of response that he would like to get from her. And, I don't even know if he knows what he wants, right? But it's certainly like interesting to read all these convolutions. He compares his relationship now between his relationship with Albertine to his old relationship with Gilberte. Remember, that was the girl he crushed on when he was a boy. And yes, the longer she is away from him, the more the memories of Albertine are fading. And then he receives another letter from her where she offers to cancel the order for the Rolls Royce. And, that letter is shared within the text. There's a bit of like an epistolary novel flavor to The Fugitive. Okay, now our narrator returns to the friend of Albertine, Andre, and he sort of strikes up a relationship with her now, and he's trying to get more details, but he's also using Andre to kind of like send a message to Albertine. He tells Albertine that he's probably going to marry Andre. I guess he wants to arouse jealousy in her so she'll come back to him. St. Loup returns and speaks with him, but also the new side to St. Loup's character is revealed, where the narrator overhears St. Loup talking to the Duchess de Grammont's footman about another worker, and he's doing this in a very wicked Machiavellian fashion. He's engineering this worker's dismissal, and this shocks and disturbs the narrator and reveals a bad side of St. Loup's character. The narrator does not reply to Albertine immediately, and then he does send a telegram, and in this telegram, he just asks her to come back with no conditions at all. And here is another major spoiler alert, one of the biggest plot points in the novel. Madame Bontemps sends the narrator a telegram informing him that Albertine is dead. Here's the telegram. My poor friend, our little Albertine is no more. Forgive me for having to tell you this terrible thing, knowing that you loved her so much. She was thrown against a tree by her horse while out riding. We did everything we could, but could not revive her. Would that I had died in her place. So that's a real earth-shattering moment in the life of our narrator. And then after the fact, these sort of letters from Albertine have sort of crossed into the household, and Francoise brings these two letters. So the effect now is one of like her speaking from the grave, because she's now like died, but now he's opening these letters from her. The first letter is approving of his proposal to Andre, but then the other letter, the second letter, asks if she might return. She says, would it be too late for me to return to you if you have not yet written to Andre? Would you agree to take me back? I shall be bound by your decision, which I beg you to let me know without delay, since you can imagine how impatiently I await it. If it were favorable, I would take the next train. Yours with all my heart, Albertine. So that is really salt in the wounds. Ironic that apparently she would have come back in a heartbeat, and yet it can't be, because she's tragically died in a horse riding accident. And so begins the afterlife of Albertine in the mind and the memories of our narrator. And I would say some of the most touching and deep passages in the entire novel are contained in these pages, where we see him agonizing over this loss, failing to come to grips with it in all its complexities. And he's still curious to know more and more about Albertine. He still wants answers to these mysteries. And so a new Albertine emerges post-death in his imagination and through the information and the evidence that he gathers from letters and from interviews with third parties. People back at Balbec and Andre and others. He's constantly reinterpreting his memories, and new memories crop up like jigsaw pieces to be puzzled together. But this is a puzzle he can't ultimately solve. So then we move on to the next major section in The Fugitive, and we turn now our focus to Gilberte. Remember Gilberte from In the Shadow of Young Girls in Flower? The narrator catches sight of a woman, a young woman, who interests him. She's with some other women. Doesn't quite recognize her, doesn't quite catch her name correctly. But as it turns out, this woman is indeed Gilberte, who has grown up. She is now known as Mademoiselle de Forcheville. She's a rich heiress. And because her father, Swann, has died, her mother, Odette, has remarried Monsieur de Forcheville. And Gilberte has taken his name. And now she's one of the richest ladies in Paris and all of France. The next big chapter in The Fugitive is turning to Venice. Remember, the narrator, on the day that Albertine left, he was intending to just like go away to Venice because he's always been wanting to go there. Well, this chapter is set there. The narrator is spending time with his mother in Venice, among the splendors of the architecture and the history and culture. And a lot happens in this chapter. It's not a very long chapter, but I'll skip over a bunch of stuff. But basically, the big plot point in this section is he receives another telegram that tells him that Albertine is alive and wants to discuss marriage. What is going on here? Well, this is a red herring, and it goes on for, I mean, I think upwards of 20 pages, where he's just, kind of processed this. But it so turns out that this telegram was actually poorly transcribed from misconstrued handwriting. The telegram is actually from Gilberte, who was informing the narrator that she intends to marry Robert St. Loup. Another big plot point. In the next chapter, we have more of a focus on the characters of St. Loup and Gilberte. And another big revelation, another big spoiler alert, is that the narrator realizes that St. Loup is, like the Baron de Charlus, gay or bisexual. And this with this whole novel, he's sort of like revising his sort of assessment of his old friend, St. Loup. Like, he's got these new wrinkles to his character. And anyway, towards the end of the novel, or this volume, the narrator is visiting Gilberte at their estate, like outside Cambrai, the old stomping grounds, as it were. And this is the neighborhood where he first set eyes on Gilberte and took interest in her. And in the conversation that they have, she tells him that he misinterpreted the look in her eyes at that first meeting. What did she really think of him? Well, she basically says she loved him. She was attracted to him. She found him handsome. She wanted to play with him and maybe more. But she said, you looked at me so fiercely that I realized you didn't want to hang out with me, to paraphrase it. And I think this is another big revelation in the book too, because remember from volume 2 of In Search of Lost Time, he spends the whole book like crushing on Gilberte, right? And, trying to read the clues and everything. And then, all along, like initially at least, she was attracted to him. She does say in this conversation that at that time when they really became friends and they were playing in the Champs-Élysées, and the narrator was going, visiting her at her house, the Swan's house. She did, I think, she says, I really got the impression that you were like just spying on me all the time. And, we get the sense that bothered her. And so she put some distance in there, understandably. And then, of course, the narrator like kind of cut ties with her, improbably. But anyway, we're getting this sort of reinterpretation of the past. So the narrator is reflecting on how he's had to modify his views of the past. And, this is a lot of what ifs, right? So he's kind of like replaying this and sort of revising the understanding. That's a brief look at The Fugitive. I really enjoyed this volume. I think it's one of my favorite volumes in the whole series of books. It's faster paced, and yet it doesn't lack any of like the deep rumination that Proust is so good at doing. And now what I'd like to do is, and also I really like the translation too. So what I want to do is compare a passage. I've been doing this for all my Proust read-through videos. I want to compare the old translation with the new translation. So let's start with the new translation, the Peter Collier. And I'm just going to do like about a page and a half worth of reading through a passage that after the narrator has received news about Albertine's death, he goes on and on and on for pages, and some like beautiful writing in here. And this is just one small section of that. In this way, these few years not only imposed upon the memory of Albertine, which made them so unhappy, the changing colors, varying modalities, and dying embers of their seasons and their hours, from their late June afternoons to their winter evenings, from moonlight over the sea to dawn on returning home, from snow in Paris to autumn leaves at St. Cloud, but also transformed the particular ideas that I had successively formed of Albertine, of the physical appearance with which I pictured her at each of these moments, and of the greater or lesser frequency with which I saw her in any particular season, making the season itself seem more or less diffuse or concentrated, of the hours of anxious waiting that she had provoked, of the desire that I felt for her at certain moments, of hopes nourished and then lost. All this modified the nature of my retrospective sadness just as much as the impressions of light and scent which were associated with it, and complemented each of the solar years that I had lived through, and which even with just their springs, autumns, and winters were already so sad because of their memory being inseparable from her, augmenting it with a sort of sentimental year where the hours were not defined by the position of the sun, but by time spent waiting for a rendezvous, where the length of the days or the changes in temperature were measured by the rise in my hopes, the progress of our intimacy, the gradual transformation of her face, the places she had visited, the frequency and style of the letters that she had sent me during her absence, her greater or lesser eagerness to meet me when she had returned. And finally, if each of these changes of weather and season yielded a different Albertine, it was not only through the evocation of similar moments, but we should not forget that even before I fell in love, each season had made a different man of me, with different desires, because he had different perceptions. A man who, having dreamed of nothing but storms and cliffs the night before, awoke, ready to leave for Italy, once the indiscreet light of springtime had let the scent of roses seep through the cracks in the shutters of his uneven slumbers. And even when I was in love, had not my changing mental atmosphere and the varying pressure of my beliefs from one day to the next diminished the visibility of my own love? Was it not one day high and rising, another day steady and fair, and another falling to storm point? For we exist only through what we possess, and we possess only what is actually present, since so many of our memories, moods, and ideas leave us and travel to faraway places where we lose sight of them. Then we can no longer enter them into the accounting system whose sum is our whole being. But they find secret ways of returning within us, and some evenings, having fallen asleep, hardly missing Albertine any longer, we can miss only what we remember. I awoke to find that a whole fleet of memories had sailed into my clearest consciousness and had become marvelously distinct. Then I wept for the things which I saw so well, and which for me the day before had been utterly absent. Albertine's name and her death had changed their meaning. Her betrayals had suddenly resumed their old significance. That's the Peter Collier. And now we will read the same passage in the Moncrieff Hudson translation. With the result that these several years imposed upon my memory of Albertine, which made them so painful, the successive coloring, the different modulations not only of their seasons or of their hours, from late afternoons in June to winter evenings, from seas by moonlight to dawn that broke as I was on my way home, from snow in Paris to fallen leaves at St. Cloud, but also of each of the particular ideas of Albertine that I successively formed, of the physical aspect in which I pictured her at each of those moments, the degree of frequency with which I had seen her during that season, which itself appeared consequently more or less dispersed or compact, the anxieties which she might have caused me by keeping me waiting, the desire which I had felt at a given moment for her, the hopes formed and then blasted. All of these modified the character of my retrospective sorrow fully as much as the impressions of light or of sense which were associated with it, and completed each of the solar years through which I had lived. Years which simply with their springs, their trees, their breezes were already so sad because of the indissociable memory of her, complementing each of them with a sort of sentimental year in which the hours were defined not by the sun's position, but by the strain of waiting for a tryst, in which the length of the days, in which the changes of temperature were determined not by the seasons, but by the soaring flight of my hopes, the progress of our intimacy, the gradual transformation of her face, the expeditions on which she had gone, the frequency and style of the letters that she had written me during her absence, her more or less eager anxiety to see me on her return. And lastly, if these changes of season, if these different days furnished me each with a fresh Albertine, it was not only by recalling to me similar moments. The reader will remember that always, even before I began to be in love, each day had made me a different person, swayed by other desires because he had other perceptions, a person who, whereas he had dreamed only of cliffs and tempests overnight, if the indiscreet spring dawn had distilled a scent of roses through the gaping portals of his house of sleep, would awake alert to set off for Italy. Even in my love, had not the changing state of my moral atmosphere, the varying pressure of my beliefs, had they not one day diminished the visibility of the love that I was feeling, had they not another day extended it beyond all bounds, one day softened it to a smile, another day condensed it to a storm? We exist only by virtue of what we possess. We possess only what is really present to us. And so many of our memories, our humors, our ideas set out to voyage far away from us until they are lost to sight. Then we can no longer make them enter into our reckoning of the total, which is our personality. But they know of secret paths by which to return to us. And on certain nights, having gone to sleep almost without regretting Albertine anymore, we can regret only what we remember. On awakening, I found a whole fleet of memories which had come to cruise upon the surface of my clearest consciousness and seemed marvelously distinct. Then I wept over what I could see so plainly, what overnight had been to me non-existent. In an instant, Albertine's name, her death, had changed their meaning. Her betrayals had suddenly resumed their old importance. So which translation do you prefer? The old Moncrieff Hudson or the newer Peter Collier? I think Peter Collier fares pretty well there, but some of you might prefer the older one. Just let me know in the comments what you think. I really have to say that I enjoyed this volume. I think the Peter Collier translation is up there with the translation of the Prisoner, which I really liked a lot, and Swan's Way by Lydia Davis. That's a good one too. At the end of all this, and I am currently reading the last volume, I will do a recap of the translations. If you like the video, hit the like button. I hope you subscribe and ring the notification bell. Helps to build support for the channel. Bye-bye.